Hello again. In section 15, we're going to switch gears a little bit within the framework of global purchasing, but now talk in more detail about the timing of purchase orders. When in the course of our supply chain activities do we need to place an order on an international vendor so we receive that order just in time to replenish the goods that we've been selling all along? A couple of comments before we dive into the beef of the topic. As noted previously, the quantities of items placed on a purchase order are a function of several factors. And we're talking about the quantities. How much do we place? How much do we buy in a given purchase order? 1,000 units, 10,000 units. That's what we're talking about here. Sales forecast, biggest item probably. Actual customer orders that consume that forecast. Any backlog of customer orders that we have. Minimum order quantities with vendors. And any quantity discount with vendors. The theme of this section is indeed timing, but we want to comment on quantities because, as we know, the entire theme of global purchasing has been around quantities and timing, quantities and timing. As we go through further examples, we're going to assume that the quantities have already been determined, but we don't want to make that assumption without reiterating one more time where these quantities come from. What's our sales forecast look like? That's going to impact the quantities that go on our purchase orders. Actual customer orders as well will impact quantities. Backlogs of customer orders. We've talked about minimum order quantities as well. And of course, quantity discounts with vendors. Our forecast might call for 1,000 units, but there's a quantity discount at 3,000 units with a given vendor. We have to make a decision if we're going to buy at that higher quantity, even though the forecast calls for a lesser quantity. That's what we're referring to here about the factors that determine quantities. Up until this point in the training, the timing of purchase orders has revolved around the concept of cumulative lead time. We've talked about this endlessly and will continue to do so. Cumulative lead times are really the determining factor in the timing of purchase orders. We're just broadening that discussion as we state in our note that in this section, we're going to introduce other important concepts and methods related to the timing of the placement of POs on international suppliers. One concept in practice known as order point, the other known as min-max levels. Let's start to get into that conversation. We'll note in our title that we're talking about the timing of purchase orders, the order point system. It's a technique for replenishing inventory, and it's pretty important as it relates to international trade. An order point system is a replenishment technique that is used to align PO quantities, as we spoke of a moment ago, predetermined for our purposes, and the timing of the desired receipt of vendor orders. When do we wish to receive those orders? Right when we need to replenish existing inventory. Second bullet, the order point methodology requires that inventory levels of a product be constantly monitored. That should make sense. It will certainly make more sense as we move forward. But for now, if we want to place orders on vendors at such a time that we receive them just in time to replenish existing inventory, we need to know what the inventory is in the first place. More on that in just a bit. As inventory levels are depleted, the product gets sold. Replenishment purchase orders are only placed on vendors when the inventory goes down to a predetermined amount in units. When our inventory of XYZ product gets down to 1,000 units, we have to reorder. That's the order point. As a trade tip, we said this already in the previous slide. Let's reiterate again. Order quantities are determined by forecasts, customer orders, backlog of orders, S&OP results, etc. The focus here is on the timing of those POs. When do we place those POs so we get the merchandise just when we need it? As such, and this is important, the order point is the moment when an item's inventory is reduced to that predetermined level. Order point is about quantities of inventory, and when we get down to a certain point, that's when we order. Something super critical to mention in our second bullet, although the order point is based on the number of units in inventory, we've already said that, the really important unit of measure in determining the order point is cumulative lead times. coming back to cumulative lead times, CLT as we'll call it, once again. We'll see why in just a slide or two. As a trade tip for now, let's say that it is very difficult, if not impossible, to determine an order point, when to place a PO, without knowing a product's cumulative lead time. This is a reiteration of a big theme on cumulative lead times that we've been driving home since the very beginning. It's becoming much more granular now as we look at specific replenishment techniques. Here's where things start to get interesting. The key to determining an item's order point is based on two concepts: what's referred to as demand during lead time, DDLT, and safety stock. As the name indicates, demand during lead time involves determining the demand for a product during the number of days that makes up its cumulative lead time. This will start to make a lot more sense in a minute, but order point depends upon knowing the cumulative lead time and determining how much demand for a product we're going to experience during that lead time. Order point is also influenced by safety stock. And in bullet 3, we summarize a definition we gave previously. Safety stock is the amount of additional inventory of a product that is carried to account for unintended disruptions in the supply chain, what we've referred to all along as variances. A variance in the forecast, a variance in production capability of a vendor, and certainly a variance in lead time. This is the last slide in this section, and when we pick back up in section 16, we'll get into the actual calculation of the order point system. Essentially, and this is very limited math, but really important, the order point for a product is determined by adding demand during lead time and safety stock. Again, the order point, while driven by time, the unit of measure is actually in the units of the product. That's why we need to know what's the demand during lead time for a product plus its safety stock. And the deal is, at the end of the day, whenever a product's inventory quantity reaches the calculated order point, demand during lead time plus safety stock expressed in units, a replenishment order is placed on the supplier. The goal, of course, is to receive the replenishment order just as the item's inventory depletes down to the safety stock level. Order point has the potential to be a little bit confusing. When we come back, we're going to give an illustration, a real-world illustration, that hopefully alleviates some of that potential confusion. So do come back quickly.